help me understand what the numbers 0, 1, and 2 are really about.
Okay, so
and even the number 3.
So we'll start off 0, 1, and 2, the numbers 0, 1, and 2, and how they relate to non-duality, and can help us to understand non-duality more.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I've also only have another 15 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. So yeah, what 0, 1, and 2. So we know to all of us, it appears that there are many things out there. There are the 10,000 things. But what non-duality says is that's an illusion. Actually, there's only one thing, and that one thing is consciousness, right?
Exactly. The one thing is the seeing, the thing that sees. And so you and I had talked about Advaita Vedanta, and we were talking about this earlier, where the meaning of the word Advaita in Sanskrit, it means not two. So it's saying that the appearance of there being two is an illusion. There is not two. And if it was true that everything is just one, then they would have just called it the one. But we don't see a one. It's like there's this paradox where simultaneously there seems to exist one thing here, just one thing here, but it also appears as though it is many. And to describe many, we are just simplifying that as with the descriptor of there being two.
Interesting. So it's been interesting lately for me so there's this space of consciousness that I have right now that I'm experiencing. You, I imagine, are also experiencing it, but I can't tell for sure. I can't tell for sure whether anybody's experiencing anything, but it's still, I have faith that other people are experiencing this consciousness. And to me, there has never ever been anything that has come into this that hasn't been filtered through that conscious perception. And so that's the one thing that I believe is the non-dual part, is that everything is within this space of consciousness, internal, external, all of it exists within this field of consciousness that I've experienced all the time, which is totally normal to me. And how does that relate to it?
Yeah, I mean, like, when I first approached the Advaita Vedanta, I think like the age-old example of, like the philosophy example of, if a tree falls in the forest and no one hears it, did it fall?
Yeah.
That's the question that it's answering. Well, if no one heard it, did it really happen? Well, Advaita Vedanta would say no. There has to have been some perception of that, and that can include the tree perceiving itself as falling. If it perceives itself as falling in some way and in its own like limited mind or its limited sensory capacity, then yeah, it happened. That's what that means.
I want to add a nuance to that, which is that we assume that the tree is limited, but the tree might actually have more subjective perceptions that result in its survival in its particular environment.
I agree with that. Yeah, we might just not have the capacity to understand what it is that it perceives.
And so then how does this relate to the Gita and to what's been going on the last couple of weeks for you?
Yeah, so, well, okay, you know what? I do want to post this to my Instagram channel because I think this is a really important point. Because people take Advaita Vedanta, they take these non-dual teachings, and they take it to mean that, okay, everything is one anyway. Why should I act? Why should I ever do anything? And what Krishna is doing in the Gita is he's actually taking Arjuna to this place where he, in the actual story, he shows him the Vishwarupam, which to me, that's like a representation of, showing him what is self-nature. Okay, this is the truth of the emptiness of all things. Now that you've seen that it's all empty, you get to come back to this world where you're about to fight this battle, and you know that reality exists on all these different levels, and that at the ultimate level, it's empty. It is just self, and yet it has the capacity to manifest this appearance, and you are in this appearance now you must act. And I think that people come to non-duality and they go right to the emptiness, the non-dual, like, okay, everything is one. I'm going to go there. I'm going to stay there and get stuck there. And they don't realize that they actually have to come back down and be real with themselves about the fact that there is some embodiment here. Enlightenment is not about going to that place
and living and staying in that place.
Yeah. Enlightenment is coming back down and integrating that knowledge in a place where, like, okay, I've seen that, now I'm back here. Now how do I act? And that is why, like, this understanding, you know, the difference between everything being one, and the idea that it is actually saying that it is not two, is very important for practitioners of Advaita Vedanta. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it reminds me of Thich Nhat Hanh's engaged Buddhism, because I think what you're describing is very common, and it's not at all new. And I think it actually happened in India first, and then it also happened in the West, maybe totally separated. I'm not sure, but it's the ascetic practice, the practice of going off, starving yourself, you know, because this body is an illusion, therefore I should just try to fight it and try to ignore it, and I want to get to that heavenly place that I've had touches of, and that shows up in Christianity as well. And so, yeah, it's not at all new, and this is what Thich Nhat Hanh tried to fight against, particularly with the Vietnam War, and organizing for the Vietnam War, was that Buddhism should be engaged, and there should be an activist side to it.
Yeah, and while like I'm encouraging that like interpretation of Vedanta, I do know yogis who have also made the choice to disengage. And I also want to acknowledge, like, we have learned from teachers like Ramana Maharshi, Shirdi Sai Baba, all these like teachers who sort of withdrew from the world and had like very deep samadhis. They exist too. And I think the tradition makes space for that. It's not saying that, okay, now that you're a yogi,
there's no forced compulsion to act, but if acting is part of your dharma, then you need to do it.
Exactly.
Yep.
Exactly. So you, as a human being, you have to be honest with yourself about what your karma is. Because, you know, and I've made this mistake too on various levels. Or back in 2014, when I first read the teachings of Ramana Maharshi, I thought it meant that I was supposed to disengage completely. I thought enlightenment was about a total just disengaging. And then over the years, I discovered, okay, there's room for me to act. And then in other ways, I would still bypass. And for me, that happened in the context of bypassing emotions, bypassing, you know, the urge to take action on something. So all of that.
How can people have a clear way of understanding what their dharma is?
Well, deep down, what is it that you feel like you want to do? What do you feel is like your heart's deepest desire? You know, like you feel compelled to interview people and learn about all these different ideas. Like, that's your dharma because you're doing it. I would say for me, my dharma is to go to my job, where I'm a data analyst. My dharma is to involve myself with my relationships with my friends and my family and the people who love me. And then also I have also recently understood that my dharma also feels like I want to communicate these ideas, and also perfect that art.
So there's two things that come from that. One, a simple way that people can find their dharma is that they can essentially look at what they're already doing and look at what they already find meaningful, and then double down on that. And the other thing was that the dharma is not static. It's not something that stays stable throughout time, that it's a subtle calling that we need to answer.
Yeah, exactly. And it doesn't have to be like something big and epic, like I'm going to go out and save the world. Like, my guru always tells us, like, you know, when someone comes and asks me, what should I do with my life? He's like, you know, get up and do the dishes. Like, that's your dharma too, like the everyday mundane. Like, you are here in this world and you have things to do. Be honest with yourself about that. This work isn't going to turn you into a hero. it's just going to make you come back to you in some sense. Like the work just comes full circle, and that's it. You know what? I think that that's the truth about enlightenment that I think a lot of people don't want to acknowledge.
Well, and I think it has to do a lot with the archetypes, and here the words of Carl Jung can be really helpful, because the archetype of a hero is like, it's, you almost want to, you want to recognize when you are running a particular program in your body that says, oh, I like this hero, I should act like the hero, instead of acting the way that is authentic to you. Because anytime that we create a hero, there's nothing wrong with heroes, but there is something unhealthy about hero worship, which Ramana actually Ramana Maharshi had the best answer to that, because everybody was singing to Ramana, and they were like, oh, like let's continue to sing, and then Ramana joins them and starts singing to Ramana as well. And then they're like, what are you doing? Why are you singing to yourself? That's strange. It's like, wait, you weren't actually singing to me, right? You were singing to the divine part of me, the divine part that shares with everyone else. And we get these archetypes in our head that we then create, and then we create a false universe in our abstractions where we try to live up to something that doesn't exist. It's not here right now, essentially. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, we create some imagination about it, or we use the past to create some other ideal that ultimately doesn't serve us, because when we hold on to that ideal, it comes back and kicks us in the teeth in some way.
And it prevents us from recognizing the conditions of this current moment, which are always what John Vervaeke calls combinatorially explosive, which are, we are unable to understand what's fully happening in this moment. So the idea that we can take something from the past and apply it boilerplate to this moment is
yeah, because the variables and the conditions are always changing. We can't say, yeah, you know what? Someone brought this up in the Art of Question group, and I think that machine learning also has this implication where you are constantly taking in information, and then the model keeps changing. And it's interesting because in machine learning, they also say that you can't make the model too fitted, which means that you can't apply like every single piece of information that you have to it, because sometimes you can make it too specific and then it's not useful anymore. Like it doesn't have the same like predictive capacity if you feed it every single piece of information that you've that you can potentially feed into it. That's interesting.
Yep.
What does that tell us then?
Well, that life is combinatorially explosive. And this is actually, John Vervaeke talks to this point as well, which is that you can't solve our human problems algorithmically because the search space of the algorithm is too large. So,
wow, yeah.
So and we've actually evolved a way out of this, which is what he calls relevance realization. So to realize what's relevant. And you can't really like say, oh, in this situation, you are going to need this relevance realization, because relevance realization is always contextual. Everything is contextual. When we're dealing with the real world, it's all based on the underlying context, the substrate. And again, I think that goes back to the non-dual part, because we can't get final answers. Non-dual, the reason why the non-dual viewpoint is the right one, or is the true one, is because life is combinatorially explosive, and we have this illusion that our brains have created in order to help us to work in this environment and to survive in this environment. But most of that machinery is actually subconscious. So and will never ever be conscious. There is no world in which I can figure out how to move this tiny cell of my muscle. There's no world that'll happen. Maybe we'll actually have, who knows, that might actually happen. But like there's like, all I can do is just give the basic signal to my hand to start doing this. I can't coordinate all the little tiny movements. Same thing with my breath, same thing with my blood, same thing, all these different things. So that's this conscious perception that I have is an illusion. And that's
yeah, that's the limited like sense of ego, right? Because you, Stewart, are not controlling all those movements. And that's like what you need to transcend, like that feeling of doership, which is also what Gita is trying to get at. It's not you, you're not the one doing it. But it is actually you doing it if you understand that you are not this limited ego.
Yeah.
I know, that's a trip. Wow, I love that term, combinatorially explosive. It's just the implication, if I'm understanding it correctly, it's the implication that the conditions are always changing. Therefore, you can never really predict what's going to happen because you don't really have a grasp on where all these different like what the new variables are.
Yep, and that precludes final answers. So human beings, both individual and collective, always have a tendency to create final answers because that is safety and certainty.
Yeah.
But in a combinatorially explosive world where we're all going to die because of entropy, it is impossible to create a final answer because everything is changing.
Oh my God, yeah. You know what? I think that's so true because I told you I was really into this text called Mandukya Upanishad about a month ago, which talks about the unreality of the world. And it is also, I think that Mandukya would, the conclusions of Mandukya would support this idea of combinatorial explosion. And then this next example that I'm about to present also supports that because, or rather it supports the idea that you never have a final answer. So a month ago, in the face of all this misinformation about coronavirus, I cared a lot about Mandukya. And then about 2 weeks ago, the George Floyd incident happened. And now we're having all these conversations about race and privilege. And now I care more about the Bhagavad Gita. When before I was like, I think I'm done with the Gita. That's not like where my level of knowledge is, but I have indeed come back to it and what its implications are. And today I had a moment. Mm-hmm.
What are the implications?
The implications are that, okay, now you're dealing with the idea, or you have dealt with the idea that the world is unreal because it is, there's infinite potential here. You could literally think anything and see that there. And you have an infinite number of different perspectives, which creates this illusion of an objective universe to the limited being. Oh. And the limited being does not really exist. What actually exists here is just his self, just this consciousness, just this sense of perception in which he sees two that is not really two, right? So when he acts in the world, he is actually just acting within himself. His sense of identity has extended beyond the little ego. So when he starts to think about concepts like racism, when he starts to think about concepts like another thing that really shook me this week was an incident of animal abuse in India that has been all over the news. When he when the yogi grapples with these concepts, he is grappling with the group mind. He's grappling with like sort of this group projection that is existing within himself. He's not dealing just with the little self, although there is a stage where that must happen. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's the thing that I've been running into, which is the biggest challenge for me as well, is that traditionally groups are a source of violence for me, and I'm extremely, I guess I would almost paranoid of where group think can lead us to, and it's something that scares me a lot. And it's, as a human being, it's impossible to be outside of that influence of the group think. It's impossible. That we were designed, we evolved in a situation where the group meant survival. But the difference between then and now is that then it was no chance of disagreement for the group. The group was part of your safety, and all of the thoughts, and you just accepted them as reality. Now we have trillions of groups, and we've never lived with strangers ever either. Strangers, living in close confines with strangers, is something that has only happened in the last, since cities happened. And so very short in our, and so, yeah, I'm that group part you mentioned is a challenging one for me. And I know you have to go pretty soon.
I do, yeah.
Where can people, what's the one thing people should get from this video?
I think that the one thing people should take from this video is that the non-dual philosophy does not imply escapism or bypassing. It implies embodiment on multiple different levels. And if we try to bypass or escape, we will continue to crash. And I think that we see that, I think a simple example of that is just bypassing, emotional bypassing. I really do have to go now. So I'm really sorry. My brother's waiting for me. We're going to go pick up takeout.
Okay.
But this was really cool.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And we should definitely do this again. And